Hello and welcome to this presentation on the 5 essential elements for a sustainable reliability improvement initiative. My name is Jason Tranter, the founder and managing director of Mobius Institute, and I really appreciate you listening to this presentation. I hope you find it useful. Okay, so before we get started, it's worth just defining what we mean by reliability. It's a term that gets used to mean a lot of different things. I guess the ability to run a plant with the lowest costs and the highest availability is really what we're talking about when we talk about improving reliability. We want the OEE up and we want our costs down, but we want to have an intelligent way of reducing costs, not just arbitrarily firing people and trying to cut costs that way. We can find ways that by reducing costs we actually improve the OEE. Now, one way we could look at our plant is that it ultimately has a maximum sustainable rate, a maximum amount of product that it could ever produce. Now, of course, your particular situation could be different, whether you're a sewage plant or an iron ore mine or a power station. Obviously situations differ, but there's a maximum rate that you could, or maximum amount that you could operate. But then we have to subtract from that the scheduled downtime. And if we had more time to talk about this particular topic, we might see that there's actually a lot of scheduled downtime that didn't need to be scheduled. There's work that's being done that really didn't need to be done. So that's one thing we need to look at. The next thing we need to look at is the unscheduled downtime. What work is being done to machines that we didn't plan on? Equipment failures, those sorts of things that give us our actual availability. So at this point, ideally we are operating our plant less the downtime. But are we able to sell everything that we can produce in that time? Because we might have process rate losses, quality losses, in other words, product that we're having to discard and recycle and so on because it's not saleable, and changeover and transition losses. And there is always the question of how much market demand there is as well. And this is an interesting point, because you might say, what's reliability got to do with that? If the market doesn't need my product, it doesn't need my product. But it's for certain industries, it's all about what your sales and marketing organization is willing to try and go out and sell. If they're not confident that the plant can produce the product, they're not going to go out and try and sell the product. When they have more confidence in the plant that, okay, we will make commitments to provide a certain volume of a particular product at a certain quality, they know it can be achieved. Anyway, lots more I'd love to say on this particular topic, but really what we're trying to do with this reliability improvement initiative, we want to affect all of those aspects. We want to achieve the highest level of availability that we possibly can. That might be a little exaggerated how much we've trimmed that down, but you get the gist of what we're trying to do. I'd be curious if you took a moment to think, what did you expect the 5 essential ingredients would be to a successful program. Some might think that it's all related to the purchase of high-tech equipment, buying the best laser alignment systems and the fanciest vibration monitoring systems and the latest infrared camera and the best filtration equipment and all of that. I don't think it's a technical problem. I used to provide that sort of system. I used to develop that sort of system. That's not the challenge, I think, that really faces you when you're trying to improve reliability in your plant. The next thing is, maybe you might feel, well, the solution is to outsource the challenge of improving reliability to consultants. So therefore the real challenge and the key ingredient or key element is to find the best consultants at the best price. Now, that's always a good thing, but the question is, should you really be outsourcing this whole initiative to consultants? I'm going to talk more about this later, but personally, I think you have to solve your own problems with assistance from consultants perhaps, but ultimately you have to take responsibility for it. And as I hope I'll convince you in this presentation, it's within your means to do it. Someone else might think, well, it's, the selection of the right analytical software to perform, true reliability engineering, to record mean time between failure, look at the statistics, project the reliability, understand where problems exist. Well, I don't think that's the solution either, personally. Now, it all depends where you are on that sort of journey from a plant that's fully 100% reactive to having some planned maintenance, some condition-based maintenance, some defect elimination and all that. If you're at that end and you've got particular pieces of equipment that are troublesome, then by all means, that's a good time to record that reliability information, because it should be useful information. You should hopefully by that stage be able to record the right information and use that information, and you may be able to use that information to determine what's wrong with the design of equipment or of your process. But I would argue that if you're at the other end of that spectrum, where you do have a lot of reactive maintenance, I don't think that's the place to start. You don't want to measure the chaos, you want to fix it. And the other one that's often a starting point, and there's other potential starting points, I guess, but a lot of people turn to RCM. RCM, there's a lot we could talk about with RCM. It definitely has a place. The concepts of RCM definitely have a place. The need for full classical RCM, I'm not sure that is the solution to that problem if you're at that end of the spectrum. Number one, it isn't purely a maintenance problem. Maintenance can't solve all the issues, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. But classical RCM you might find sort of bogs you down. But anyway, that's just in my opinion. They are not the key ingredients. Here's the first of my key ingredients, or essential elements for getting this right, and that is to establish a reliability culture. Everyone has to buy into the belief that reliability is important. It's not enough to just have one champion of reliability. It's great to have a champion of reliability, but you can't just have that one person or small group of people who are leading the charge and ultimately having to do battle with a lot of other people. The whole plant must have this reliability culture. Everyone has to understand it, believe in it, see themselves as being part of the solution, not part of the problem, and have whatever education and training they need so that they can contribute to the reliability improvement program. So everyone needs to buy into the reliability culture, and that's people in engineering, in procurement, people involved with inventory management, planning and scheduling, maintenance, operations, all the way through, for sure. And the biggest issue, it's not just a maintenance issue. Sometimes I get the feeling that people talk about reliability improvement, and I think it gets pointed at the reliability person, like he's somehow an irresponsible person who's just takes a slapdash approach to doing the maintenance work, and I don't believe that for a minute. There's no doubt that from a maintenance point of view we can contribute to the reliability improvement initiative. The way equipment is installed, commissioned, the lubrication and ongoing care of that equipment, repair and overhaul practices, planning and scheduling for sure has a important contribution to make, spares management and the way the parts and spares are stored, all very important, no doubt about it. But that's not the whole sum of the problem. What else is? Well, design. For starters, it's an interesting thing. Sometimes I feel that people look at the reliability of their plant and feel that they may even believe that the original design let them down, and procurement, which I'll mention in just a minute, that's what maybe let them down, that their plant is inherently unreliable, and that's just the way it is in industry, and therefore there's this feeling like, well, that's our lot. Now, how do we deal with it? And I just disagree with that. The idea that what you've got is as reliable as it can ever be, I just think is incorrect. You can do a lot to improve the reliability of what you've got through those maintenance practices and through other things that I'll mention. But certainly any new equipment that is being selected for the plant, whether it's an expansion or just replacement motors or a new compressor or whatever it is, that design process must have reliability and maintainability as a really high priority. It's got to be maintainable and it should be reliable. And even if that costs a little more up front, it's the lower life cycle costs that you need to be looking at. The lower cost of operation has to be foremost in everyone's mind. And the same is true with procurement. We need the lowest cost of ownership, not the lowest upfront purchase price. Now, that may be difficult for the procurement department to really assess. Well, what is the lowest cost of what product choice do I have that provides the lowest cost of ownership? And that's where you can help. You can help by setting standards to say, well, you can't choose anything that doesn't meet these requirements. And then you can use acceptance testing to say, well, we're even going to test that it does meet those requirements, and it is fit for purpose in our plant. So these are, two very important aspects. And then there's the question of, regardless of what we've done with maintenance and the design and procurement, what happens when we operate the equipment? Is it possible that that is influencing the reliability? Well, it sure does. And understanding and developing standard operating procedures that ensure that the equipment will provide the lowest cost of operation, and taking care of that equipment, that is important. And we've got to break down that sort of silo mentality between maintenance and operations. They've got to see that they're both in it together. They both have to work together and have the mentality that, well, we have to achieve the lowest operating costs, and we work together to achieve that. But just from expanding a little bit on this point, here is a study that I got from Ron Moore, but you can see the numbers down below and where it came from. But it basically identified that only 10 to 30% of breakdowns were caused by poor maintenance practices. 30 to 40% of breakdowns were caused by poor equipment condition, in other words, the care of the equipment or the original design. And 40 to 50% of breakdowns caused by poor operating practices. So there's your maintenance group that a lot of people point the finger at when it comes to a question of reliability, and they're not responsible for most of the problems. And these sorts of studies have been repeated many times. This one, I'm not actually sure of the origin. It just came from Ron Moore, as you can see below. But again, a study to look at what was the root cause of production losses. And we can see that we've got this small chunk related to maintenance, a bigger chunk related just purely to operation, and then non-equipment related losses. So there are a lot of reasons why you might have production problems, and it's not all about the maintenance of that equipment. It's not to say we don't want to take care of maintenance issues and make sure we're doing the best possible job, but if that's your only focus, you're not going to achieve the best possible results. So, step number 2, element number 2. You have to take a long-term view. Anyone that just thinks, well, I'm going to do something for a little while and fix this problem, it's just not going to happen that way. There is no quick fix. It's not a project that we're going to do for 18 months, and at the end of the 18 months we just won't experience problems anymore. There's no doubt that there are a lot of little things we can do, and they will have improvements. We will reap the rewards from those changes we make. There may be redesigns of equipment, and we should always reap the rewards from the new design. But there's a lot we can do that will only be effective while we keep the focus on reliability improvement. We need to keep seeking out those new opportunities to improve reliability, but keep the focus so that we don't slip back into our old practices. So as part of this, you need a plan with realistic goals. Don't, as the picture's trying to say, don't create these really, really lofty and unrealistic goals, because you're going to be frustrated and disappointed. Management's going to be frustrated and disappointed. It's just not the way to do it. You just have to set realistic goals, but they've got to be long term. But that long-term goal can have lots of little milestones in between, so you can get lots of attaboys along the way, proof that progress is being made, but an understanding that this isn't all going to happen and fix itself in the next 12 months. So, how do we go about that? Number one, I recommend starting with benchmarking. There are lots of sources of benchmarking information from SMRP, Reliability Web, Aberdeen Group, and other groups that can say, well, for your particular industry, this is perhaps what you should shoot for in certain areas. And you can compare yourself against those benchmarks, or you can just look back through your own history and say, well, what is the best we've ever achieved? What is the best throughput, or however you want to measure it, and say, well, we'd like to at least get back to that point. And you can say, well, we're going to measure ourselves against that. So that's a very good starting point, and it's also a very good starting point to have sort of a line in the sand to say, okay, well, we are, from today onwards, we're going to try and improve reliability, but let's just sort of benchmark and record where we are today, so we can always say, hey, listen, the benefits of what we've been working on and the investments that we've made, that's where we were back there in October of 2014, or whenever you're looking at this presentation. That's where we were, and that's not what we want to go back to. And the other part of that is to have meaningful KPIs. Key performance indicators are a way of providing measurements and indications and trends to show that you are making improvement. And in the case of benchmarking and KPIs, you can also say, well, these are our goals, and so therefore this is the opportunity that still is ahead of us, because we haven't achieved those goals quite yet. But it is important to measure what you want to improve. I see some organizations, they have all these KPIs, and it forces people to do things that ultimately doesn't actually help, but they're being measured on those things, so they tweak their practices, they rearrange priorities and all that sort of stuff so their KPIs look good. Well, that doesn't help anyone. It's important to understand that this is a long journey, and we need to sort of employ the concept of continuous improvement to continually progress along that journey, if I can put it that way. And the challenge of making those incremental improvements, on the one hand, as I mentioned, is by using the KPIs and benchmarking to say, well, this is what we think we can achieve. But on the other hand, it's using root cause failure analysis. Now, that doesn't have to be, an overbearing process with special teams and software. And I mean, it can be, when there's really serious failures and, that sort of situation. But for your everyday, the bearing that failed and this that failed and that failed, there's a process you can go through to just identify why did it fail, how, after we've made all these changes, did this all still happen, and you can decide, well, we know why, but to change that practice is not economically viable. On the other hand, you can say, hey, great, we've got a new opportunity. We've just realized that we still need some training here, or we still need a new tool there, or whatever it is. It can be as simple as pulling the bearings out of the machine, looking at them, and looking at the patterns and saying, okay, look at that, we've got a misalignment problem. We didn't realize we had an alignment problem, but the pattern on the bearing says so. We've got an EDM problem, we've got current going through the bearings. We've got a contamination problem, whatever it is, it's right there on the bearings. So there's a lot you can learn without having to be really elaborate about it. But one important part is to continue to sell senior management on the benefits of what you're doing. You have to use their language. If you talk to senior managers in terms of vibration limits or filter particle sizes or anything like that, it's like that's not what rings their bell. You got to ask the question: what do they care about? It's things like safety, it's throughput, it's production rates, it's generally dollars and cents and compliance with regulations. And you've got to couch everything in those terms to show that what you're doing is absolutely essential, in their goals. So they help you, you help them achieve their goals, and then you'll keep them on side. As soon as you stop reminding them how important you are, they may look at you as an opportunity to save some more money. And that brings us very neatly into the topic of leadership. You need that leadership. Now, I've had this discussion with a lot of people over the time, and sometimes people feel, well, if I try and engage senior leadership, then it can make things very complicated and potentially political, and I get the spotlight on me, and maybe I don't want that spotlight. They're all issues that you have to think about. At the end of the day, I do not believe it's possible to have a long-term sustainable reliability improvement initiatives to achieve those goals without having leadership on board. That senior management need to appreciate the opportunity. You can lower costs and you can achieve greater availability. And that's got to matter. You can reduce the number of safety incidents as well, I should have put there as well. And they are all things that are important. And you can say, well, I can achieve those goals. I need your support so that when I recommend that we change a certain practice, I know that I've got your backing, and you will support me in that, and the rest of the people in the organization will understand how important this is. Now, just to correct what I just said, it shouldn't be a case where you have to go in, point the finger at someone and say, you change your ways. There are ways to help people come to the conclusion themselves that they need to make a change. That's a whole other topic. But either way, if you've got the support of the senior management, they're more likely to listen to you and engage in that conversation and come to that conclusion than if senior management don't seem to be supporting you at all. One thought is to treat it like safety. If you think about how industry has changed over the years, that once it was far more commonplace to have accidents, and if they need to get the plant going, then someone would climb into that confined space, and there were all sorts of little shortcuts taken because it seemed like it was important. It seemed like the risk was acceptable, but the regulators on the one hand, but management have said no, it's not acceptable. And that may be because of insurance premiums and so on, and it may be for moral reasons. That's not really the issue. The bottom line is, if you look at how things have changed over the years, safety is extremely important, and the culture has changed. And safety is not negotiable, and reliability shouldn't be either. Everyone should accept that I'm going to do things to improve reliability, to reduce those operating costs, and I'm going to do it safely. And the fact is, we could talk a lot about this, but the fact is that when you improve reliability, you improve safety. You have fewer safety incidents when equipment is more reliable. So you need that senior management support that understands that you can't cost cut to success. Another one of these topics we could talk for a long time about, but it's been proven again and again. Managers who look to achieve improved financial results by simply cost cutting, it never is a good long-term strategy. I mean, unless the industry is completely changed and you need to scale down, or there's a lot of fat in the organization for some reason, which generally isn't the case, this just isn't the strategy that's going to work. They have to take the long-term view that I've already mentioned. They have to prevail against resistance. So when people maybe say, hey, I've been doing this for years this way, why do we need to change? You need to know that senior management have your back and will support you, so that they appreciate, yep, okay, I know it's easier, I know we used to do it that way, but now we're going to change, and this is why. And of course they have to make those investments. But this is, by itself an important issue. It's all about how much investment. Your organization might say there is no money to invest in this area. But I always find it a really curious thing. Why is there money to replace bearings that should never have been, replaced, and replace motors that shouldn't be replaced, and have overtime labor that's unnecessary, and bringing in contractors that's unnecessary. Why is it okay to spend money in all those areas, but when you say, I'm going to spend money so you don't have to do those things, it's, oh no, we don't have any money. It's the same when you talk about precision skills. Why is there no time to precision align a machine, but there's always time to fix the failed bearing in 6 months because you didn't precision align the machine? Well, why is that? It's human nature. We put off our problems and all that sort of stuff, but that is the mindset that has to change. Now, this concept of the bow wave has been spoken of before, but here it is graphically. First off, we're going to start with a plant where there's a lot of reactive maintenance, a lot of breakdowns, maybe some planned maintenance, and you've got to ask yourself the question in your situation, what the ratio is between them. And the common sort of belief is, well, you've got to invest a lot of money, or a certain amount of money anyway, before you start reaping the rewards and you get into this sort of profitable area. And it depends just what how you do that and how quickly you reap the rewards and all that sort of stuff. We can have that discussion, but I would say that there's a slightly different approach to this. And although it looks a bit funny, the idea is, let's invest a little bit, reap some of the rewards. Invest a little bit, reap the rewards. Invest, reap, invest, etc. And we can continue to do that. And some of that can be, before you really get senior management on board. You can get a few runs on the board by making some small changes, go back to management and say, hey, see what we did. Now let's do this as well. Again, all these topics, I'd love to have more time with you to discuss them, but the other point I wanted to make is that once we do that, and even though I've shown this as sort of a flat line which implies that we're not going to invest anymore, this is the sort of the long-term idea, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever. And if we keep the focus on the reliability improvement initiative and our new reliable culture, and we may continue to make these little investments, well, we'll keep reaping the rewards. But beware of the successful, complacent reliability improvement initiative, because one day this new manager comes along and looks at the people involved with precision lubrication and this and that, condition monitoring and these other areas, and the person who's in charge of the program, and the ongoing investment perhaps in training and tools and materials and whatever associated with reliability improvement, and that person sits there and says, you know what, we don't seem to have a reliability problem. Why do we continue to invest in this and employ these people? And that person makes a little bit of a hero of themselves and quote unquote saves the company some money. And just as long as that person gets promoted up out of there, or they jump ship to another company, they never actually see what a disaster they created, because sure enough, when they let those people go, they go off and they go to consulting companies, and they go to the competitor of the company and other industries, and they go off and do good work in those places. And the people that are left, are quite likely, it's been done so many times in industry, they fall back into their own old practices, and new people get employed and they haven't been trained and they don't get it, and in no time, far less time than it took to sort of improve reliability in the first place, you'll be back to where you are. And it's been done so many times. I could tell you lots of stories, but anyway, so you don't want that to happen. You need to continue to sell management and make sure that this person never gets this opportunity. It'd be like someone coming in and saying, hey, I've got this great idea. We don't have many safety incidents. Let's get rid of all these safety practices and meetings and training and whatnot. It's like, what? You're kidding? You can't do that. Well, we should have the same sort of an idea with reliability. Okay, so moving along, You need the senior management support when it comes to the topic of leadership, but you need some sort of reliability leadership group, whatever you want to call it. But you do need a group within the organization that is ultimately driving this program. But that group needs to have the courage to drive the process. They need to lead by example, so they need to stand by their decisions, always think along those reliable ways. But also, when you go out, which you must, and ask operators and mechanics and others to say, well, what do you know about reliability? Like, what do you see happening that causes equipment to fail? And I guarantee you'll get all kinds of suggestions. We've been saying this for years. We shouldn't be doing this. And when I do that, this always happens. And when you guys choose those cheap pumps, that's what happens. And you'll get all kinds of suggestions when you ask. But if you don't listen and follow through, if you don't come back to them either with fantastic suggestion, we've made this change, and let's see how it does improve things, or if necessary, that was a great suggestion, but for these reasons we just can't do it. We can't get the budget approval, or for some other reasons with that person may not understand. It may not be as good an idea, but closing the loop and making sure people understand that you've listened and acted on their suggestions is really important. But as part of that, you've obviously got to involve everyone in the process, from engineers to operators. I mean, up and down the line, from senior management to the, anyone involved with lubrication and everything. Everyone needs to see safety a certain way, and they need to see reliability a certain way. So it's great to have the champion. A lot of plants that have some success will often have one person that's passionate about it, a good natural leader and so on. But so often that person works a little too much in isolation, doesn't perhaps train the other people and really get the full buy-in, and that person gets, maybe because of frustration, or maybe just because the grass is greener with the consultant or another plant, they get poached away and everything is lost. You can't make yourself vulnerable like that. You've got to have a plant of champions, not just one champion. And that leads me to this next point. It has to be, in my humble opinion, it has to be internally driven. Plant staff or facility plant staff have to take ownership of your reliability issues. It is your problem. You stand to win or lose. You win if the plant's more reliable, with better financial results, with more stability and assurance that the company's going to keep running, you won't be called in on weekends and have all the stress associated, particularly if there are accidents, safety incidents. But of course you lose if the reliability isn't improved. So what you do dictates the success or failure of the initiative. I don't think someone can just come in and fix reliability. It's not to say that you can't bring people in who will help you, but the goal has to be to help you improve reliability, not expect them to just come in, turn a couple of bolts, make a couple of changes, give the machine a bit of a polish and leave. I'm talking, metaphorically there, but a person can't come in and fix your problem. The culture has to change. But different organizations will choose to use consultants for various reasons, and sometimes very good reasons. I would just argue that if you are going to have a large-scale consulting program where people come in and really do take charge of things, then you need to make sure that the ultimate goal is to make you self-sufficient, so that when they leave you hardly notice, because there will have to come a time when they leave. But if they leave and then suddenly everyone goes, oh, glad they've gone away, or what do we do now that they've left, or if there's anything like that, well, it was a waste, because pretty quickly everyone's going to fall back into those old habits because they're just easy. It's easy to do things the unreliable way. It just is. Unless those people have trained you how to, change your practices, and the company takes on that reliability culture that I mentioned first. On the other hand, utilize the expertise of consultants. Now, something I've said already and I will say again is that the challenge associated with improving reliability is within your grasp. Now, you may feel, well, geez, I haven't been trained on vibration or trained on lubrication and all those kinds of things, but you know what? It's really not rocket science, and it's not that you have to. That everyone in the plant has to have some great expertise in vibration analysis or lubrication, or creating acceptance testing standards, or whatever area you want to look at. The fact is that everyone has their particular role, and yes, you will need someone who has some expertise in vibration, but perhaps if you're a maintenance manager or if you're a reliability engineer, although that term is used for so many different roles, but if you understand the basics of vibration, if you understand enough, then you know how to choose the right consultants, you understand their reports, you know if you're having the wool pulled over your eyes, you know what equipment to purchase, and you can employ people who are properly trained and certified who can do the work. That's the help you need from outside to make sure to sort of set you on the right path. Get people who have the specific expertise on filter selection, or I mentioned the example of vibration or whatever. Get their expertise, take it on board, and run with it. Now, this is one of my controversial statements, I guess. There are people out there who have a financial incentive to make out that this is a really, really hard process. Now, it's not easy, and I'll come to that. It's not easy, but the challenge doesn't lie where I think you may think it lies. I believe it's a human problem. It's a culture change problem with technical issues. Yes, there are technical complications, but it's all about changing the culture to have a long-term, sustainable, effective program. No consultant's going to come in and change your culture. It's all about education, which I'll get onto in just a moment. So I'd be wary of anyone who says it's really hard and therefore beyond you. I think that's because they're going to come in and try and help you. Like I've said, it's also not that complicated. Yep, there are complicated little pockets, but people can be trained specifically on those things. You can get consultants who are skilled in those very narrow areas. Just do that. Take responsibility for everything else. But also, I am not saying it's this easy. Yep, there's a challenge, but you have to climb up those stairs. Don't take one of these little zippy things up the side. And anyone who says it's that easy, they're probably trying to sell you, something that is not going to work. Okay. Last, but certainly not least, is the need for education. Now, I've got to declare my hand because I make these comments about consultants and so on. Mobius Institute provides training and certification for vibration training, and we'll have other condition monitoring training and certification soon. And we have, what's the appropriate thing to say? We have e-learning that covers all these areas of reliability improvement and condition monitoring and so on. So, yes, what I'm about to say might seem very self-serving, but that doesn't make it untrue. I can just tell you that every plant that I've ever seen that has any success with improved reliability, absolutely positively there's a strong training component to it. People have all been brought up to speed, people believe in it, people understand it, and there's just not these little sort of pockets of understanding either. So when I talk about education, you don't have to be a PhD and really, really specialized in all the things, but you've got to understand the need for certain people need certain knowledge. expertise in what they're doing, but knowledge about what other people are doing so that they know how to coexist. For example, operations and maintenance need to work hand in hand. Maintenance needs to understand all about condition monitoring to an appropriate level of depth. You need the knowledge. Certain people need the skills. The person who's going to do the shaft alignment or lubricate the machine, they need certain skills. And then everyone needs the buy-in. You need to have that belief that this is all important, and understand what you can do to contribute to the reliability improvement initiative. And to me, the only way to get that is through education. Education can be used to gain the support of that senior leadership, that senior management. The important thing is that you don't try to turn them into vibration analysts or planners and schedulers. You understand that there is a certain level of detail that you need to provide and certain information that they're willing to listen to. And like I said earlier, when you talk about safety and availability and reducing costs, that's what they want to hear, and you need to put everything in that context. But it's part of the education process. Education obviously needs to provide the knowledge that's required. The education's there to provide that plant-wide buy-in that I've mentioned, and to develop the skills necessary so that the person can do precision alignment, that the person doesn't contaminate the lubricant when dispensing it, so that the bearing is installed properly, that the machine is operated correctly, etc., etc., etc. I've got this little thing I call pockets of knowledge. So what I'm trying to depict here, this is the company, just made to look like an industrial factory or something. But what we're looking at here is different people's level of knowledge in certain areas. So here, perhaps, is the vibration person who's been off, on a Category 2 or Category 3 course, and that person really gets it, is really well trained. And then maybe over here there's a person who's had some training on root cause failure analysis or something, and maybe there's someone over here who's been trained on some topic as well. But number one, you've got to appreciate that, as I'm trying to show here, the level of knowledge is going to decrease, and therefore you need refresher training. But the real critical part here is that these little isolated silos, these people who have a certain level of expertise will find it awfully frustrating because the people around them just don't get it. So you can have this great vibration analyst who can pick a bearing fault from a mile away, but when that person talks to operations or other people within the maintenance group, they say, "Oh, yawn, we don't care. Look, when the bearing is really making a lot of noise and it's a real problem and it has to be fixed, then we'll deal with it." Other people just don't get it. They don't appreciate what that person's trying to do. Same with root cause failure analysis or any other little individual skill. It's not until everyone has a level of understanding, and they all need to have that level of understanding at around the same time. It's no point, for example, you could invite us to come in and do a little seminar in your plant. We get asked to do that all the time. Terrific. What happens the next week, or 3 weeks later, or 6 months later, a year later? What is the level of knowledge then? You lose the momentum. I see people at conferences all the time, and I'm sure they're feeling all enthusiastic about what they've learnt during that conference, and they've listened to some papers and presentations and said, "Wow, this is great." And then they go back to their plant and it's like, no one gets it, no one understands them. Maybe a couple of those people will go to the conference the following year. It's not a bad thing, but boy, it's going to take a long time before people really get it. And by that stage, what about the new employees that have come in, and the people who have changed their role, and the people who were trained and they've now forgotten? So, what's my point? My point is that you need more people to have more knowledge. You need a lot of people to have that knowledge around the plant. It's when everyone understands, and everyone understands about what everyone else is doing, to a sufficient level. That's when the culture changes. That's when you really, really notice a change, and that's when you don't fall back into the old practices. Now, I can click and make all this happen. Obviously, it takes a little time. You roll out training, you do it in a proper way, but I think personally that it's very important. Now, I'm going to say something else that's controversial here, and there's a lot of training courses around, but I personally feel that there are too many training courses where the aim is not to improve the knowledge of the attendees, it's to sell something, maybe the consulting services, maybe a product or whatever. And again, I've been in this industry 30 years, and you just see a lot of this sort of thing. So I call it Trojan horse training, where the Acme Consulting Company, not Acme Consulting, it's Acme Training Company, come in, it's the training arm of the consulting group, and they say, I'm here to teach you. I will empower you with great knowledge and wisdom so that you can go off and do this yourself. And look, I don't want to generalize, because there are people who do good training, and yep, if you need them to come in and give you a little bit of help, they do, and that's terrific. Give you a little bit of help to fill in any gaps and set you on your way to be successful. But too many times you see training and it just seems like it's deliberately complicated or deliberately vague, and what's really happening is, when the lights go out, the consultants appear. I'm not going to say where they appear from, and that's the end game. Oh, you're having trouble with that? Well, let us do it. We sell that equipment that you need. We can do the audits and tell you what you need, and then provide you with the equipment. If you really, really can't do it yourself, fine, get that assistance. It's just not rocket science. You can do it. Now, just stepping back for a second, I must admit, when putting this presentation together and thinking about the 5 essential elements, there's actually 2 paths I could have taken. Obviously, you've seen the path that I did take. I think it's worth just mentioning something else, because if I looked at any organization that was trying to go down this journey, I would say that there are sort of a more practical, if I can put it that way, or the building blocks that you need. You do need to have planning and scheduling. If you don't have it, you need it. You're not going to make all these improvements if you don't have that. And sometimes people say, but the budget, there's no budget. Well, I guarantee you that if you've got a team of millwrights and mechanics and so on, electricians, that you will be far, far more efficient if you took 1 or 2 people out of those roles. You take the best people, men, women, doesn't matter, take them out, give them a bit of training, planning and scheduling, and that group, even though you've got fewer people with their hands on the wrenches and so on, they will be far more productive than ever before. There is not a loss. And what did it cost you? Maybe you need to increase their salary a little bit, but that's it. It's just that now everything's organized, a topic we could talk about for a long time. Condition monitoring is definitely one of those essential elements. You need a way to monitor the condition of equipment and assess the severity and nature of the problem so that you can plan with these people and schedule the work. It gives you a look into the future, and depending on how well you do that, you get to see further in the future. Depending on how well you've achieved buy-in, that dictates how many people are going to listen to the advice from the condition monitoring group. And then I put the reliability-centered maintenance and PMO. It is important to review the PMs and optimize that process, to look for the PMs, and there are so many of them, that aren't adding value and remove those, and to identify other maintenance tasks or inspections or maintenance activities that you do need. But all of this needs to be taken together. Where can you perform condition-based maintenance? Where are there genuine opportunities for interval-based maintenance activities? And where might you need to do a redesign or something like that? And where might you just let equipment fail because there's no financial justification to do anything else? So this is all important, but do you need to do the full classical RCM on every single piece of equipment in your plant? I don't think so. Maybe 15 or 20% of the pieces of equipment, but anyway, that's just my opinion. The other thing that I think every organization needs to look at is defect elimination. Now, this is a term that perhaps sounds fancier than it really is. What it really is looking at all the root causes of the majority of equipment problems, electrical, mechanical, whatever, and eliminating them. But the question is, do you need to go through this process to determine what that is? Do you need to, what those activities are, where the defects are being originated? Do you need to do root cause failure analysis on everything? Or is it true that the vast majority of industry suffers from the same problems? They're those maintenance activities, those maintenance practices, the operating practices, the design issues, the procurement issues, inventory management, the way equipment being stored, planning and scheduling. Go and take care of all the low-hanging fruit. Take care of eliminate all those sources of defects, and then, and maybe during that process, but certainly afterwards, you can go in a bit deeper for those real troublesome bits of equipment or specialist bits of equipment where you have to say, well, no, there's something else going on here. But, what are the root causes? They're very well documented. Just go take care of them. And then there is the issue of root cause failure analysis. Take care of all the low-hanging fruit, look at your maintenance practices, but when equipment fails, make sure you are asking the question, why did that happen? Is it preventable? And is it economically justified to prevent it? They're important things. So, in conclusion, I clearly believe that education, senior management support, taking a long-term view, the need to own your own future, and developing a reliability culture are all important. But this time I've got them in a slightly different order, because I believe that education is at the root of all of them. If you take care of education and start building the belief and building the knowledge and acquiring the skills, well, in the early part of that gives you the ability to convince and sell senior management, and you will achieve that through an education process. And once you have that senior management support, then you can take a much longer term view. They should appreciate we're not going to fix this overnight. We can make these little incremental improvements which all have a reasonable payback. And a lot of times, when I talk about a payback, there may not be much of an investment. When I just talked about planning and scheduling, you can get, if you don't have a CMMS system, you don't have to jump out and buy SAP. Hey, we've got a little spreadsheet you can use. I don't want to trivialize it, but you can take baby steps and get some runs on the board. It just depends what your starting point is. All of this enables you to own or control your future. You have the knowledge, you're in control. Get the consultants in to do the little bits, get the trainers in to do, where you need it, but you drive it, and don't see this as the bus driver with everyone, taking a ride. It's everyone is driving the bus, basically. Okay, one person's leading, but everyone is involved. And finally, I guess we could use the analogy of the rowboat or something with everyone paddling together. I'm sure there'll be something like that we could use. Anyway, all of that develops the reliability culture. When you do these things, all of that develops the reliability culture. But you really need that education component. And by developing the reliability component and the culture, it makes the education process easier. people aren't as resistant to, if you say, hey, listen guys, we're going to have a little seminar, or you're going to do this e-learning, or someone's going to come in to do a workshop or whatever it is, people are feeling passionate about it, and they see, oh great, here's another opportunity to learn something. It's just taken together, that's what happens. Anyway, I hope you've found what I've just talked about to be beneficial, and I hope I haven't offended you if you're a consultant or something like that, but feel free to contact us. There's our sort of general email address is learn@mobiusinstitute.com, or of course there's our website mobiusinstitute.com, where we've got lots of these presentations. We've got lots and lots of them. And all for free. Just go on there, and if you know other people within your organization that might like this particular presentation, or one of the many others that we have. Also on the on YouTube, we've got, actually I forget how many movies we have, but we have the Mobius Institute YouTube channel, and you can subscribe to that channel and be updated when we put a new movie there. But we get about 10,000 views every month of our movies. We're up over 800,000 views of all those movies. So there's got to be some good ones amongst them, I would like to think. And hey, they're all free, go ahead. But obviously if you are interested in training and certification and all this sort of business, please drop us a line, and we'd love to talk to you. Thanks very much for setting aside 1 hour and listening to this presentation.